Okay, so basically a very small topic that we need to do. This was left, तो इसको अभी देख लेते हैं जल्दी से. इसमें एक दो वीडियोज़ ही हैं और ये स्मॉल छोटा टॉपिक है और ये डिफ़िकल्ट भी नहीं है, सिंपल सा है. अच्छा, इसके ऊपर एक फेब मार्च में क्वेश्चन भी आया इन फेब मार्च 2023. द क्वेश्चन सेज एक्सप्लेन द पॉसिबल कॉन्सिक्वेंसेज द पॉसिबल इकोनॉमिक रीजंस फॉर इनइक्वालिटी ऑफ इनकम and consider whether inequality of income can be of any benefit to the economy, right? So एक simple question है आपसे. सबसे पहले तो you need to define what income inequality is, then it's asking you the reasons for inequality and then whether it is beneficial for an economy or not, यानी उसके pros and cons बताने हैं. So yes, 8 मार्क का question है, तो इतने ज़्यादा डेप्थ में आप pros cons नहीं करेंगे, लेकिन बताएंगे इसमें, लेकिन हम इस क्वेश्चन को बेस बना के टॉपिक की प्रॉपर डिटेल में कवर कर लेंगे. ठीक है, सबसे पहली चीज़ इनकम एंड वेल्थ इनइक्वालिटी क्या होती है. बेसिकली इनकम एंड वेल्थ इनइक्वालिटी सिंपली रेफर्स टू हाउ अनइवनली your income and wealth is distributed throughout the population, right? So the less equal the distribution of income is, the higher the income inequality, right? And income inequality, remember, is often accompanied by wealth inequality. And remember that income and wealth inequality is not good for economic growth, neither good for economic development. It just worsens the poverty, especially the relative poverty. So income and wealth inequality, the gap between the rich and the poor would just keep on widening itself. So, and there's unequal distribution of income and wealth in society, basically, right? So, जब हम इनकम एंड इक्वालिटी की बात करते हैं, सबसे पहले तो आप ये समझें कि व्हाट इज़ द डिफरेंस बिटवीन इनकम एंड वेल्थ. बेसिकली इनकम इज़ बेसिकली अ फ्लो कॉन्सेप्ट. फ्लो कॉन्सेप्ट का मतलब है कि इनकम को फ्लो एज एन इनकम आती रहती है, इट फ्लोज ओवर. सो बेसिकली वी आर मेजरिंग इनकम एट अ गिवन टाइम पीरियड. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, अब मैं इनकम को मेजर कर रहा हूँ एट द एंड ऑफ द ईयर, बिकॉज इनकम तो मेरे पास पूरे साल आती रहेगी. सो इट्स अ फ्लो कॉन्सेप्ट, दैट इज यू आर मेजरिंग इनकम एट अ गिवन टाइम पीरियड. लेट्स से एट द एंड ऑफ द ईयर. सो आई वॉन्ट टू सी कि एट द एंड ऑफ द ईयर मेरे पास क्या इनकम है. तो जब मैं एट द एंड ऑफ द ईयर इनकम मेजर करूँगा तो मैं देखूंगा कि जैन फेब मार्च अप्रैल में कितनी इनकम फ्लो हुई है, मेरे पास कितनी इनकम आई है, यानी एक साल के बाद कितनी इनकम आई है. अगर मैं एक मंथ में इनकम मेजर कर रहा हूँ तो फर्स्ट, सेकंड, थर्ड, फोर्थ, फिफ्थ ऑफ द मंथ से लेकर 30th ऑफ द मंथ तक कितनी इनकम आई, राइट? However, wealth on the other hand is a stock concept. Stock concept simply means that it is measured at a given point in time. Income is measured over a period of time, while wealth is measured at a given point in time. यानी उस पॉइंट पर मेरी वेल्थ क्या है. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, लेट्स से राइट नाउ how wealthy am I or how wealthy are you, right? And what is the right now, let's say at 31st of December, what is the value of my assets, right, in let's say January or December. So wealth क्या है? Wealth आपके assets हैं. And remember that assets have market value, right? When you say that they have market value, it simply means that you can buy and sell them because it has market value. And wealth generates income, right? Wealth generates income as well, basically, because assets can be bought and sold. So if I buy a property, I sell it at a higher price, I'll gain profit out of it. Also, let's say I invest in shares. So shares पे जो मुझे dividend मिल रहा है वो मेरी इनकम है. शेयर्स मेरी वेल्थ है, उस पर जो डिविडेंड मिल रहा है मेरी इनकम है. प्रॉपर्टी पे जो मुझे रेंट मिल रहा है, वो प्रॉपर्टी मैंने रेंट आउट की, उस पर जो रेंट मिल रहा है वो मेरी इनकम है. तो क्या क्या चीज़ें वेल्थ में डाल सकते हैं? आपके क्या कहते हैं, पेंशन स्कीम्स, आपकी जो है पेंशन स्कीम्स में जो पैसा डाला हुआ होता है आपने, दैट इज़ पार्ट ऑफ वेल्थ. स्टॉक्स, शेयर्स, हाउसेज, प्रॉपर्टी, बिल्डिंग्स, गवर्नमेंट बॉन्ड्स, गोल्ड, दिस इज ऑल पार्ट ऑफ योर वेल्थ, राइट? Also remember that wealth and incomes, they mutually reinforce each other, which means that if income goes up, people will become more wealthy because they'll buy more wealth, they'll invest in property and etc, etc. And the more wealthy they are, that wealth will ultimately generate income for them, extra income for them, and with that extra income they'll buy more wealth. So it just keeps on reinforcing each other. With high incomes we can purchase more assets, and when wealth goes up, your assets generate further income, and that surplus income can then be used to buy more wealth, right? So the high wealthy people, remember, will have higher incomes, and people with higher incomes will have higher wealth, right? So question भी आपसे ये पूछ रहा है कि what are the causes of inequality of income, ठीक है? तो causes देख लेते हैं कि इनकम इनइक्वालिटी के हमारे पास क्या है. सबसे पहले ये लिखना, इसी तरह स्टार्ट करना, इट्स नॉट गुड. इनकम इनइक्वालिटी पे क्वेश्चन आएगा, जनरल इंट्रोडक्शन, यू विल डिफाइन व्हाट इनकम इनइक्वालिटी इज, यू विल टेल दैट इट्स नॉट गुड फॉर इकोनॉमिक डेवलपमेंट एंड इट रिजल्ट्स इनटू poverty, especially absolute poverty, and it's not good for economic growth and development. And policymakers need to come up with policies to make sure that distribution of income is equal, because equal distribution of income is also one of the important macroeconomic objectives of the government, which has long-term implications, right? So it's a very important indicator for measuring economic development, remember that. इकोनॉमिक डेवलपमेंट को मेजर करने का एक बहुत बड़ा इंडिकेटर है, यानी वेलफेयर को मेजर करने का सोसाइटी में एक बहुत बड़ा इंडिकेटर है इकोनॉमिक इनकम एंड वेल्थ इनइक्वालिटी। जिन माशरों सोसाइटीज़ में ज़्यादा होती हैं उन सोसाइटीज़ में वेलफेयर हार्म होता है, ठीक है। पावर्टी लेवल सोसाइटी में ज़्यादा होते हैं, एब्सोल्यूट भी और रिलेटिव तो होता ही होता है पावर्टी। Now, what are the causes of income inequality? Number one, age. Age is also a cause of income inequality. Why? Because as you get older, your experience and human capital will increase, which will raise your productivity. And when your productivity goes up, your incomes and wealth will also go up, because the more income you earn, the more wealth you will make. So जैसे जैसे आप older होते जाते हैं, आपका experience बढ़ता जाता है. So obviously, you know, the size of human capital goes up, which increases your productivity levels, and it helps you earn more incomes, and then obviously it helps you earn more wealth. You in some sense you could argue with this, but yes, in a generic sense, yes, this is one of the reasons. The younger generations, obviously you could say that they do not have the same experience and human capital, and thus they receive obviously lower incomes and lower wealth, right? The second reason for income inequality is, so there's an income inequality का age एक बहुत बड़ा reason है, ठीक है। So another reason कि income differentials इतने क्यों हैं, basically income inequality में income differentials is one of the reasons why income inequality exists in society, and age is one of the factors that contribute to it. Second is education. Obviously those people who are more educated with greater school and college or university qualifications, they are much more likely to earn higher incomes, especially in a capitalistic economy, right, compared to those, let's say, who have little or no education at all. And because you need to understand, a capitalistic economy, capitalistic markets, they pay individuals according to what they are bringing in at work, according to the level of their productivity, and how much revenue can they bring into the employer. If you can bring me more revenue, then I'll pay you more, because you are worth it to me right now. So I'll pay you according to what you bring in on the table, right? So with less education, you're not worth a lot to the employer, hence you will be paid less. Hence, that's the reason why we see that some people are really highly paid while some are underpaid, and that is another reason of income inequality, right? Education, and the less the education levels in an economy, the greater would be the income inequality, because the rich will get the opportunity to get good education and then learn whatever the tricks of the trade are for a capitalistic economy, while the poor will never be able to make it there. Another thing that is causing income inequality is let's say you have one sector that is dominant. Let's say, so for example, you could say that if the economy, let's say, is highly specialized with output that is coming from one dominant sector in the economy, right? And if its workers and, let's say, the capital owners in that specific industry are the only one who will benefit from higher incomes, whereas the rest of the economy will only benefit, the rest of the economy will benefit indirectly, it will just worsen the income disparities. Because what's going to happen is that if, let's say, I'm going to repeat this point again, basically, if your economy, let's say, is highly specialized and, maybe the capital, maybe in the economy, the manufacturing sector or the capital intensive sector is dominant. So all the workers and the capital owners in that specific industry, the workers of that industry, the capital owners and the owners of the factors of production, the entrepreneurs in that industry will be the ones who will benefit from higher incomes. Whereas the rest of the economy will not benefit to an extent. They will just benefit indirectly, while those people will benefit directly when that industry grows. Because in that economy, it is a sign of imbalanced economy, basically. It has only one dominant sector that is majorly dominating the revenues and GDP of that country, right? So, and that will just widen your income disparities, right? Simple point. Another reason that could cause income inequality is, globalization and the free movement of labor and trade. Because so basically the fact that globalization and then the fact that there has been free movement of labor means any one person can move and shift to another country in search of better work, and exports and imports and the concept of trade liberalization. Basically, all of this has led to increase in income inequality as well, especially in developed economies as well. Why? Because immigration into developed economies is basically reducing the wages of low skilled workers there and low paid workers there, and it is increasing an immigration, because immigration developed economies में skilled workers की हो रही है, and it's basically so basically what's happening is that immigration, what you need to write is that immigration is decreasing the wages of low skilled workers and low paid workers, and it is increasing the pay of those already who are on high salaries. So people who are on high salaries, they are getting their wages are rising, but because of immigration, the wages of low skilled workers and low paid workers is going down, right? And the simple reason is that, maybe there's a surplus because of immigration. There's a surplus of low skilled, unskilled, or low paid workers. It is that is bringing down their wages. While on the other hand, let's say you could also say that trade liberalization results into maybe more increase in foreign competition. Trade liberalization से overseas competition बढ़ता है, and what that does is, because of that foreign competition, it reduces the wages of low skilled workers, because firms क्या करेंगे, they will try to cut their cost of production because they need to compete with foreign competition. And सबसे पहले किसको टारगेट करेंगे? लो पेड वर्कर्स को. या तो उनको निकालेंगे या उनकी वेजेस कम करेंगे, मे बी सैलरीज नहीं देंगे. So this is another reason for income inequality. So although the fact that globalization and free movement of labor and trade is very beneficial for an economy, but there is this problem that has been witnessed in the past few years, especially in developed economies. Then another factor that you could mention is basically your technology. Now, technology, in many cases, we know that it has, replaced a lot of jobs, or it has made various skills of workers redundant, reducing the wages in those specific industries. And the problem is that this has pushed many workers into low paid and low skilled work. But it has also, we could also say that it has created a niche sort of sector of jobs that requires certain technical expertise or specific skills where, wages are higher. So because of technology, a certain niche has been created, niche sector of jobs has been created कि यार बड़ा specific category create हो गई है jobs की कि भाई जिनके because of technology के वही लोग, वही skills, वही education, वही technical expertise और वही specific skill के set के साथ जो लोग आ रहे हैं, सिर्फ उन्हीं को जो है वो वहाँ पे उस niche sector में jobs मिलेंगी और उनको higher wages मिलेंगी, वरना जो low paid और low skilled workers हैं उनको नहीं मिलेंगी. तो बात वही हो रही है कि वो जो niche sector है, the niche sector is benefiting in terms of higher wages because of technology, but so maybe the tech sector, let's say, right, that is benefiting, and people who are working in the tech, they are getting really, really high boost in wages because they are coming up with a certain skill set and the technical expertise that is required in the tech industry. But at the same time, a lot of people who don't know how to use tech, those workers are getting redundant, and that is also pushing many workers into low paid and low skilled work because they are redundant. So they are not required by any industry. So they are looking for now, in order to fulfill their needs, they are basically searching for low paid or low skilled work. So it is creating this imbalance in society, in inequality of income and disparity. Also, technology has substantially basically increased the profit potential of certain specific industries without the need for a large number of employees. So for example, the banking sector and all of that, because of technology, you don't need a lot of employees, right? So it is increasing their profit potential without the need for a large number of employees for certain industries. And what this will do is that this will increase the incomes drastically in such professions, especially where technology has allowed the profit potential for those industries to go up without the need for large employees. For many employees. So the incomes in those industries of the specific workers who will stay in those industries, जो बचे रहेंगे उसमें, उनकी wages तो बहुत तेजी से बढ़ेगी because उनकी जाहिर सी बात है skilled workers की shortage होगी, and they'll get a high pay, but then it will just widen the income inequality for a lot of people who will be jobless now, right? Then ownership of financial assets and property is another reason why your income inequality could exist. So especially a lot of people own financial assets such as stocks, shares, government bonds, or maybe if you have a very wealthy employer, he might end up giving you a rewarding or a good pension scheme. Sahi hai na? So, and all of this will just create greater wealth for those who have that wealth, but those people who don't have those incomes will never be able to get those financial assets, right? So they will have the greater wealth than those who haven't received enough income to purchase those financial assets. So for example, people who own property, for example, let's say buildings and all of that, or land, they will be significantly better off in terms of wealth than those who don't have the money to own property. And we know that as property prices keep on rising, people's wealth will keep on rising, which will cause them to have higher income, and they will further purchase more property and wealth, which will just worsen the income inequality compared to those people who don't have the money to buy that, right? And also, the wealth, remember, is passed on from the older generations to the younger generation. That worsens the income inequality. Also, you could say that जहाँ तक हम इसकी बात करते हैं, also you could also mention about the fact that there are certain wage differentials, massive wage differentials that exist in certain professions. For example, let's say in Pakistan, a maid or a driver will be very much underpaid and undervalued, while a chartered accountant will always be highly paid and highly valued. But the point is that the maid for the next 50 years as well would not be valued more or will always be underpaid here, right? उनके बेसिक राइट्स नहीं होंगे, एक्सेट्रा एक्सेट्रा. वेज डिफरेंशियल्स बहुत हैं यहाँ पे. कुछ प्रोफेशंस में बिल्कुल भी वेजेस नहीं है इतनी, which will just worsen or create more income disparity and income inequality. And that is why the state kicks in to reduce the income gap by providing incentives and welfare benefits, or maybe by keeping a minimum wage law or something like that. Corrupt governance could also be another factor that would contribute to income inequality. Corrupt governance could worsen income inequality, because maybe if the government is corrupt and the administration and the entire governance or the entire body is corrupt, they will not redistribute the tax revenues to help the poor in the form of transfer payments or spending on education, healthcare and infrastructure. Instead, they would pocket that money to themselves in, let's say, hidden bank accounts. And we know that corrupt governments may also, ये भी होता है कि corrupt governments जो होती हैं, they sort of divert that tax money to the elite class, to allow them so that and we know that elite class has a higher voting power. They are the people who are sort of running, who have a high socioeconomic status and running the economy. उनको टैक्स का पैसा उनके जेबों में डालते हैं ताकि उनको अगले साल they give them more vote and they join their political parties. So you could mention that the corrupt, इसको लिख कर कैसे होगा, इसको ऐसे लिखोगे, you could say that the corrupt governments may divert that tax money to the elite, who have a higher voting power, and the capital owners may possess that voting power, and they will receive a large funding from so the large funding that will be received from such groups for all these electoral campaigns basically. So you could say that as well, or you could just mention the fact that अगर ये नहीं भी लिखना तो you could just mention the fact about the corrupt governance and how they don't redistribute income in the tax money to and keep that in their pockets and all of that. तो ये सारे रीजन हैं, ये सारे कॉजेज हैं कि आपकी इनकम इनक्वालिटी क्यों होती है. तो द फैक्ट दैट ये क्वेश्चन आपसे कह रहा है कि क्यों होती है. इसके अलावा कुछ और कॉजेज भी आप लिख सकते हैं. दे आर सॉर्ट ऑफ बेसिक कॉजेज दैट, जहाँ तक बात लैक ऑफ एम्प्लॉयमेंट अपॉर्चुनिटीज़ की है, लैक ऑफ प्रोफेशनल स्किल्स, लैक ऑफ एम्प्लॉयमेंट अपॉर्चुनिटीज़, राइट. You could mention, in some economies you have poor vocational training. So because of that, a lot of people don't get the opportunities. Maybe there's lack of investment in education, healthcare sectors, and because of that, it holds back human capital that is needed to promote economic growth. Poor infrastructure issues as well. You could also say that in some economies, you have low rates of people have low rate of savings, which hold back the private and the public sector investment. So economy जब grow नहीं करेगी, तो पॉवर्टी से आप कैसे निकलेंगे. जब पॉवर्टी से नहीं निकलेंगे तो आप you will still be just into a poverty cycle, trapped into that cycle of poverty, and then income and wealth inequality will just keep on widening, because the rich will be able to manage themselves while the poor won't be, right? Also, poor people are unable to sort of get small loans or microfinances or loans from banks and the investment that is required to do a business. So they always remain poor in that way, right? They will never get the funds to sort of start a small business, or maybe they will not get the funds to start a formal education. So they'll remain poor. So they are stuck in a poverty cycle. So इसको poverty cycle से connect करना, income wealth inequality को mention करना कि in developing economies the poor are trapped into a poverty cycle, and that just makes the income inequality sustains, and it just keeps on worsening. The income inequality is maintained and it just keeps on worsening with time, right? तो अब इसमें जो second part of the question है, it talks about whether inequality can be of any benefit to an economy. तो अब बिल्कुल इनकम इनइक्वालिटी के कुछ बेनिफिट्स भी हैं, लेकिन वो बेनिफिट्स एक सर्टन सेंस और एस्पेक्ट में इसको वो देख लेते हैं, एंड इनकम इनइक्वालिटी के डिसएडवांटेजेस देख लेते हैं कि यार इनकम इनइक्वालिटी के क्या डिसएडवांटेजेस होंगे और क्या बेनिफिट्स होंगे टू एन इकोनॉमी. ओके, सो इफ यू लुक एट द नेगेटिव कॉन्सिक्वेंसेस ऑफ इनकम इनइक्वालिटी, उसमें सबसे पहले जो तुम लोग लिख कर आ सकते हो, यू कुड राइट अबाउट हायर लेवल ऑफ डेट. यानी डेट जो होता है, ओवरऑल डेट लेवल्स जो होते हैं बड़े होते हैं. हम इस वक्त कंट्री की बात नहीं कर रहे, हम इन जनरल बात कर रहे हैं, बिकॉज द मोर इनकम इनइक्वालिटी देयर इज, द मोर इंडिविजुअल्स हु विल बी ऑन द लोअर एंड ऑफ द इनकम स्पेक्ट्रम, बेसिकली इन द लोअर टैक्स ब्रैकेट्स or the lower end of the income spectrum, they will need to borrow to finance their expenditures such as houses, cars, furnishing, etc. क्योंकि उसके सिंपल रीज़न ये है कि फ्री मार्केट या कैपिटलिस्ट, और ये सबसे ज़्यादा कैपिटलिस्टिक इकोनॉमी में होगा, फ्री मार्केट कैपिटलिस्टिक इकोनॉमीज़ में, बिकॉज the free market capitalistic economies do not account for their needs, right? They account for the needs of the rich who can afford those goods, and thus it excludes the poor from consumption, basically, because they won't be able to afford, so because they can't afford the market price, and as a result the poor will need to borrow to finance their basic consumption, right? It will just increase excessive debt on them, so so इससे आपकी debt based consumption बढ़ेगी, and the problem is that if banks lend, the banks are also at a risk, because excessive debt and the fact that the banks are risking, they're taking a risk, it can create instability in the financial system. जो basically तुम लोग लिख कर आओगे वो यही लिख कर आओगे कि excessive debt, because the poor will just keep on borrowing, and risk taking by the banks, it will create instability in the financial system, basically, because of the financial system is just giving and giving and giving a lot of loans to the poor. And the problem with this is, the harm is that it will increase the chances of a financial crisis, which may culminate into a deep recession, because what if the poor defaults and they are unable to pay back those loans? तो banks को तो liquidity crisis हो जाएगी, financial crisis हो जाएगी banks को, and it will just end because banks को जब पैसे वापस recover नहीं होंगे तो फिर people who will genuinely want loans, banks will not have the money to lend later on then. So how will businesses finance their own investments and people finance their own consumption then? So it will end up into a recession then. So a deep recession into the economy can come if there comes a point where those loans cannot be paid back. So this is one of the problems of income inequality, the negative consequences of income inequality. The second thing that you could write about is the cost to the government. The cost to the government is basically, the cost involves the policies that the government needs to come up with to deal with income inequality. And those policies are very costly. They're very expensive for the government. And on top of that, there is also a social cost that the government has to deal with, that comes in with income inequality. And the social cost is also caused because of income inequality. And if the government spends money to, on welfare benefits and let's say on education to sort of reduce the income inequality, that carries a severe opportunity cost. And the problem is that if the money has been borrowed, let's say from the private sector to finance those expenditures, let's say, we know that could cause a crowding out effect on fiscal policy में पढ़ चुके हैं. Plus, if the government is borrowing that money by issuing government bonds, because the government needs to finance its expenditures to reduce income inequality, maybe provide essential public services, transfer payments, spend on education, give or subsidize domestic education for the poor. So obviously the government later on will, and if government borrows that money, then the chances in the future are that taxes will be raised in the future. And the problem is that if the government raises indirect taxes in the future, such as VAT, VAT or fuel duties, to fund part of this spending, right? We know that these taxes are regressive. They hit the poor more. It will just worsen the income inequality. It will especially hurt the poor, then it will worsen the income inequality. And it is basically, technically what this is doing is that it is contradicting with the intentions of the policies. The policies were to reduce income inequality. It worsened the income inequality because the policies to reduce income inequality included government spending on the poor, and for that government spending, the government had to borrow, and when it borrowed, it had to increase taxes in the future to fund that and to pay back the borrowed money, so that the government can come up with finances to pay back not only the borrowed money, but it can also partly fund that spending. And if those taxes are indirect taxes, they are regressive and they hit the poor. It worsens the income inequality, which contradicts the intentions of these policies. And let's say if the government funds these policies through cutting down the spending in other areas of the economy, such as education, healthcare, public transport, then the negative impacts would once again be suffered by the poor more, who will rely on these services basically, right? The third point that you could talk about is the social costs to society. And we know that poverty can create social issues such as high crime rates, more vandalism, more riots, protest, marital family breakdowns, mental health issues, fractions between class groups, etc., which again puts more pressure on government's finances in terms of more spending has to be done on policing, defense, and judiciary and law and order. And these social costs carries a lot of significance, because all of these problems that I just mentioned, crime rates, riots and all, they carry negative externalities on society. And it could create social breakdown in society as well. The fourth point that you could talk about is lower economic growth. And obviously, income inequality results in poverty, and poverty results in less incomes, and then less incomes means less consumption, and it just reduces the chances of economy growing properly, right? Not only growing properly, but growing unequally. It just widens the income disparity. And plus, there's another way to explain this point as well, that those people who are on lower incomes, remember that they have low levels of education and health, right? Which reduces their productivity. People on lower incomes, they have poor health, they have poor education, which reduces their productivity levels. When productivity goes down, when productivity decreases, it decreases potential economic growth. It's just PPC in words, which obviously means that the growth rates in an economy will be lower than what they should be. So अगर productivity or education or health पे काम हुआ होता, productivity अच्छी होती, growth rates would have been much higher than what they are right now. So the potential economic growth goes down, and it reduces as a result of that, it keeps the growth rates lower than what they should have been. So income inequality has certain benefits, but these are not the direct these are benefits in a certain aspect only, remember that. So when you're writing about income inequality, how could income inequality be beneficial? So income inequality could be beneficial because, in the sense that it could promote very strong incentive for individuals to gain those qualifications and skills by improving their level of education, so that they could improve their standards. Because the workers will know that the only way they could access a high paying job and come close to the rich is because of their human capital, and productivity levels needs to increase so that it can justify higher wages. So they know that their human capital and their productivity needs to increase to justify a higher wage. And for that, it will create an incentive for them to gain higher qualifications and skills by improving their education. So this is a good thing for the economy now. Why? Because not only will this benefit an individual, because his living standards would go up in this way, but it is also good for businesses as well, because businesses will be able to get more employees who are more qualified now, which will increase the labor productivity as well. Labor productivity goes up, economically productive potential goes up as well. PPC will shift outwards. And higher labor productivity reduces cost of production for firms, reduces average cost, results into more economies of scale, and hence it will increase the international competitiveness of the business as well as the cost goes down, because labor gets more productive just because of the fact that there's more incentive for individuals to grow now. So in that sense, yes, you could mention कि यार ये सारे benefits लिख कर आना, and the fact that it reduces international competitiveness as well. ठीक है? So strong incentive for individuals to gain those qualifications and skills by improving education. They know that improving the only way that they can justify a higher wage is by getting a higher paying job, but that their human capital and productivity should go up for that. And this will benefit them because their living standards would go up. It's good for the business as well, and it's good for the productive potential of the economy. Good for labor productivity levels as well. Labor productivity levels will go up, reducing average cost of production, economies of scale. गुड फॉर इंटरनेशनल कंपेटिवनेस होगी तो एक्सपोर्ट रेवेन्यूज आएंगे, करंट अकाउंट पोजीशन इंप्रूव होगी. तो 2-3 लिंक्स क्रिएट कर सकते हो. दूसरा, रिमेंबर दैट इनकम इनइक्वालिटी could encourage enterprise, and the fact that it could encourage entrepreneurial, की स्पेलिंग मैंने गलत लिखी, entrepreneurial spirit, right? So because the reason is that the incentive to because of the income inequality, the incentive to innovate will be there, always be there. Because there will always be an incentive to innovate, take the risk and create new products and service when we know that there is an appropriate reward for it. Because we know that it results into the ability to earn more. The more rich people have wealth, we know that rich people have wealth, and the only reason why they have so much wealth is because they have these huge businesses that have turned into that they have made a fortune out of it. And people who are on the lower income groups know that the only way they could make money is by starting a business instead of just doing a 9-to-5 job and earning nothing out of it. So the ability to earn more is than others who might not have taken the risk of entrepreneurship always exist. So it just encourages it encourages the poor people to take risk, and it encourages enterprise and entrepreneurial spirits, and the incentive to innovate basically and grow and create new products and start a business. So you could say that successful entrepreneurial, so if those poor people who have low incomes, they take businesses. So remember that successful entrepreneurial activity can ultimately lead to technological advances in the economy, increasing productive potential of an economy, increasing long run growth for a country, while also creating employment opportunities for others as well. Right? And at the same time, people on low incomes will also benefit because these successful businesses will then later on provide, let's assume, high quality goods with at lower prices, and it allows the entrepreneurship and the entrepreneurial spirit in societies to flourish and more people to start businesses, which could in the long run reduce income inequality, right? Also, you could mention that income inequality could promote a work attitude and not a welfare attitude. इसका मतलब basically ये होता है कि because of income inequality, there is always a strong incentive to get to work and do whatever is necessary to access higher paying professions rather than living on welfare, on unemployment benefits. Because we know that unemployment benefits provides unemployment benefit मिल रहा है, welfare payments मिल रही है, transfer payments मिल रही है, इतनी थोड़ी होती हैं. उनका standard of living तो फिर ही poor ही होता है ना, which provides a much poor standard of living. Those welfare benefits provide a much poor standard of living. So as a consequence, there's more pressure on government finances, right? Because of the funding of the welfare state, the government needs to probably, to make sure that it keeps on funding and transfer payment keeps on giving transfer payments, the government needs to borrow from the public or the private sector, or maybe in future they need to increase taxation. That is not sustainable for a long time. So it sort of promotes a work attitude and not a welfare attitude, basically. Because the government also knows that, this is not sustainable. We need to push people to get into jobs, and they will come up with policies in that way, right? So income inequality, you could also say that income inequality could also have a positive trickle-down effect if that trickle-down effect takes place. And this is basically so for example, if the rich people are earning higher wages, but those rich people, instead of saving, they spend that money. So spending that money would create a regional multiplier effect, basically. It would create a multiplied rise in incomes, which would create more job opportunities for others, who will then receive more higher wages, who will then spend, creating further opportunities for businesses to grow and hire more people. And as a result, you could say that incomes will rise in the economy for a lot of people in society, and for the poor as well, in that case, as the economy is growing, as the incomes are rising, right? So in that sense, yes, it could have a positive impact. Income inequality could automatically reduce in the long run as well. And people will ultimately start earning more incomes. तो ये कुछ basic benefits हैं बहुत जेनेरिक से बेनिफिट्स हैं, लाइक आई सेड स्मॉल टॉपिक है, जेनेरिक से बेनिफिट्स हैं, यू कुड सॉर्ट ऑफ मेक देम अप एंड राइट इन योर आंसर, बट जस्ट सी के मैंने ये बहुत जेनेरिक बेनिफिट्स को बहुत इकोनॉमिक सेंस में बोला है. सो मैंने जो भी बोला है इसको मेक श्योर दैट यू राइट इट डाउन. आई एम रिपीट व्हाट आई सेड दैट income inequality can be positive if the trickle down effect takes place, basically, right? And this is when individuals who earn higher wages, they spend that money in the economy, which creates a regional multiplier effect and job opportunities for others who then receive higher wages themselves. And consequently, these incomes can rise for the majority in society rather than rising incomes being then being confined to only those people who are earning the highest wages. So it reduces the income inequality later on as well, right? तो ये आपके कॉजेज भी होगा, बेनिफिट्स भी होगा. बस अब हमें क्या करना है, अब हमें करने पॉलिसीज. कॉजेज हो गए, प्रोज एंड कॉन्स भी हो गए, पॉलिसीज टू रिड्यूस इनकम इनइक्वालिटी.